Welcome to We Get Work and the Year Ahead 2025 podcast series. This year, our special report and corresponding podcast series are created to help you move forward steadily, seamlessly, and successfully in a workplace law environment in persistent flux. Jackson Lewis invites you and others at your organization to experience the report's legislative, regulatory, and litigation insights in full at our website, jacksonlewis.com, or listen to the podcast series on whichever platform you turn to for compelling content.
Thank you, Alicia. Hi, everybody. My name is Samia Kermani, and I am the co-leader with Michael Thomas of the Corporate Diversity Counseling Practice Group at Jackson Lewis. And with me is Richard Greenberg, my old friend and longtime colleague. Rich, you want to introduce yourself before we get started?
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Samia. My name is Rich Greenberg. I'm in the New York City office of Jackson Lewis, and I am one of the co-leaders of the renamed Multi-State Solutions Practice Group.
And multi-state solutions, Rich and team do provide, which is how we got to know each other over the years, I would say, with helping understand multi-state rules and statutes and obligations, but most importantly, marrying them so that we can understand how to implement them in practical ways. So, Rich, we're supposed to be talking about ballot initiatives this year. And so I can go on and talk about what's happening in my space, in the DEI space. But let's start with you. The way I see it, we're still in this space where maybe some states are trying to pass laws that provide more employee protections than federal laws provide. So what's going on in your world?
What's going on in my world is exactly what you just described. It's harder and harder to be a day-to-day human resources professional or managing legal in an organization due to the myriad of differences between state and local laws. And that requires an analysis of whether we want to go to lowest common denominators, which involves consideration of stakeholders, which involves consideration of costs, or whether or not we have the ability to operate different policies and systems in different states, which then interacts with IT and systems. So it requires an overall analysis of where the organization wants to be. And now we have another issue that we always need to think about, which is humanity. I don't know about your perspective, Samia, but from my interactions with clients, individuals have more expectations for treatment in the workplace, and the importance of policies that make people feel that they're treated well and go beyond the law often militates towards national approaches. One other thing I also always talk about with clients is when I started doing this, drumroll please, 28 years ago, individuals in different states didn't know what happened with each other. They didn't communicate with each other. Now with social media, with internal networks, with external networks, you could roll out a policy in one jurisdiction, not intending to cover people in other jurisdictions, and they learn about it 30 seconds later. And then they're knocking on HR's door a minute later saying, why are you treating me so poorly compared to my colleagues in XYZ? And it requires a very, very broad analysis of your culture, your goals, your retention, interest, your turnover rates, in order to determine policies with the overlay of what state and local law require.
Right. And it's not easy, right? Because state and local and federal laws are changing and changing quite rapidly. So I want to tee off something you said, though, which really resonated. The piece about culture is so important. And that's where kind of my world comes in, right? So we're in this space right now where we're seeing more of the push and pull with a whole chunk of the population advancing DE&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and a chunk of the population trying to retreat from it. And so the focus right now in terms of ballot initiatives is on federal and state initiatives that are purporting to ban or curb DEI. And we'll talk about in a second, or I think we should talk about what it means. So as we all know, Republicans are ready to take control of both chambers and the White House. So we'll see more of this. So Vice President-elect J.D. Vance proposed a bill to curb DEI initiatives at businesses that have federal contracts. And Interestingly, the bill classifies directors on boards of public companies as employees rather than independent contractors, subjecting them to the same anti-discrimination and perhaps other laws as company employees. And so this has implications that goes beyond just DEI. And the bill also prohibits federal agencies from establishing and implementing DEI initiatives. It prohibits funding for such programs and prohibits requiring people to participate in organizational DEI programs. And this is all part of the White House agenda. So, as I'm sure people have been reading, opponents of DEI will blame DEI for having too many workers in the federal government, for example, for discrimination or for even, companies' safety problems. And what we were seeing, so there was a big Supreme Court decision in 2023, Students for Fair Admissions. And up until that decision, we were seeing an uptick in so-called reverse discrimination claims. And we were seeing that long before that decision came out. And we've certainly seen it since. And there's been a ton of attention on companies that are retreating from their DEI programs. So in terms of ballot initiatives, there are at least, by my rough count, 19 state bills pending that in one way or another aim to curb DEI programming and initiatives. For example, Montana, even New Jersey, South Carolina, Texas. Interestingly, there are federal bills pending with the same purpose, and they're all about public agencies, higher ed institutions, federal and state contractors. But I said there's a push and pull. So I think also interesting is that there are state bills pending that advance DEI, like adding to the list of protected characteristics or appointing state DEI oversight offices. And there are federal bills pending to advance DEI, like a bill to recognize the term woke, right? So we're seeing so much legislative activity. I don't know what you think, Rich.
I mean, Samia, when I hear this, I always ask a very simple question. I'd be really interested in your thoughts on this. When you look at this proposed legislation, do you think the drafters really understand what DEI means and what the goals of DEI are, and that a good DEI program is not about quotas and the political issues that so often jump to the forefront in speeches and things like that?
That's such a great question, Rich. And we didn't rehearse this. But it brings me to what I think is the most interesting thing here. People are banding for or against something called DEI, but they're often talking substantively about different things. So just stepping back for a second, the law, it hasn't changed. It's always been against the law to make employment decisions, for example, based on protected characteristics like race or gender. And DEI, done right, simply means trying to understand and break down barriers to ensure equal employment opportunity without discrimination. That's not just lawful, it's actually required. So, to your point, DEI has come to mean, or it's been morphed to mean, making decisions based on things like race and gender to advance some underrepresented group, when really what it has been about and done well is about looking at your workplace. Can we cast a wider net to ensure we're getting the best talent anywhere? There's nothing wrong with that. And it means that we're ensuring we're making known the keys to the kingdom in terms of advancement and connections to everyone. We don't have to make protected characteristics-based decisions to do that, and we shouldn't be. So DEI really once was focused on helping the organization's bottom line by making sure discrimination isn't getting in the way of recruiting top talent or getting more customers, making more money, right? So I feel like we're seeing a lot of talk about companies retreating from DEI, but we're also seeing companies remain committed to the DEI they're talking about, to ensuring equal employment opportunity. So I feel like it's being mistranslated into making decisions based on race or gender. So I don't know, back to ballot initiatives, it's going to be very interesting to see how the terms are defined in the legislation and what they're interpreted to mean by the courts. I don't know. That's what I
Also,
think. Yeah.
Samia, building on the points that you just made, whether or not the debate over any of these issues will go beyond the short attention span, micro discussion point that so much of our world, not just the United States, has turned into, because these are not simple yes or no questions. They're questions with broader societal goals, trying to ensure everyone has an opportunity to succeed, the famous American dream, for lack of a better term. And I just don't think sometimes when people are thinking about these issues that they really understand, even if they're against something, why they're against it, other than they read some bullet point that said, I may lose my job because of a quota. But turning a little bit to the non-metaphysical and the more black and white, which are the ballot initiatives I'm going to address, just as a slight precursor, one of the hardest parts about multi-state responsibilities over the last few years has been the growing influx of state laws. And those state laws and local laws cover many of the same areas. Of course, they're never all identical because that would make our life easier, but it's more a copycat sort of mechanism. And some of those areas covered include minimum wage, include paid sick leave, include marijuana, include captive audience meetings, include other psychedelic drugs, and include rights for rare rideshare drivers or others in the gig economy. And the ballot initiatives this year tied directly into those issues. So, running through them in short summary, minimum wage. Alaska and Missouri, the voters voted for minimum wage increases. California, shockingly, the voters voted against minimum wage increase. And with that said, I want to note that California already has a very high minimum wage comparatively. And there are also about 15 to 20 local minimum wages. But California is never a state that anyone would have thought there would have been a no to anything that was at all populist. And if you're ever having trouble sleeping, go on Google late at night and search for articles about why the California proposition failed. And they will put you to sleep, but they're very interesting. Because what they showed is that voters outside of high income areas, the San Francisco Bay Area, for example, seem to vote against it in the majority because of the concern of rising prices. Voters in those higher income, higher cost communities voted for it because the cost of living is so tremendous. But again, that ties so much into the dichotomy right now that so many of us are dealing with in the United States. Similarly, in some jurisdictions in which an employer is allowed to take a tip credit for tipped employees, i.e. pay a sub-minimum wage with the delta made up by tips, some states have tried to move away from that. Massachusetts voters said, no, we are not going to do that. We are going to keep the current structure. The bane of my existence co-managing a national policy practice is paid sick leave laws and leave for any other reason laws, because they require employers to make that decision between that macro policy, extending things nationally, different policies in different jurisdictions. 3 more jurisdictions voters voted in paid sick leave laws: Missouri, Nebraska, and Alaska. Those are all effective at some point in the near future. Of course, in order to develop good, strong policies, we'll have to wait for guidance. As to marijuana, while Nebraska voted yes on medical marijuana, South Dakota, North Dakota, and Florida voted no to recreational marijuana. And there's been an ongoing trend with recreational marijuana where many, many more states have legalized it for tax revenues. But we're starting to see a little bit of pushback now, which I think may tie in to the view of the new administration. And then in that assorted vent, what we had seen were a bunch of states passing laws saying that employers can't hold captive audience meetings, which we always felt was preempted by the NLRA because those meetings are often held to discuss employer views related to organizing. Alaska, through a ballot initiative, enacted something similar. Since that time, the NLRB reversed years of precedent and also outlawed such meetings, except it's fair to assume that that law is going to switch back when the National Labor Relations Board comes under Republican control. And the final issue I mentioned was how we've transitioned to a gig economy and what are the rights of gig workers. And one of the largest realm of gig workers, thankfully, are rideshare drivers. I personally can't imagine what life would be like without rideshare drivers at this point. The concept of finding a local car service to go somewhere, it's sort of like anathema when I talk to my 18-year-old daughter and I explain this to her. She looks at me like I'm crazy. It's like when I tell her I didn't have a bank machine to go to until I was in college, or a cell phone. She looks at me like I have 16 heads, but that's a separate issue. But Massachusetts, on a ballot initiative, provided rideshare drivers with the right for certain collective bargaining rights. So in essence, what we saw is the same thing we're seeing from state and local legislatures. Voters approaching these issues, not in a unanimous way, but with different views. And even if they agree on things, never agreeing them in the same manner. But it's that same series of specific issues that require analysis of different state and local laws that make the HR professional's life much harder than it used to be.
Yeah, and your point is so well taken, and then we'll wrap up. But I feel like we have gone from hashtag Me Too to hashtag Black Lives Matter to hashtag Stop Asian Hate, to et cetera, to COVID, right? All of these inflection points have caused employee expectations for the workplace to change. And so that's the bottom line. But I'll go back to what I always say to our HR professional and legal professional friends and clients is that, look, we've done this before and we'll do it again. And so with that, we should wish everybody a happy holidays, Rich, and call it a day.
Everyone have a wonderful, safe, and healthy new year.
Thank you all for listening, and stay tuned for what's coming up next.
Thank you for joining us for the Year Ahead 2025 Special Edition podcast series. Please tune in to future episodes where we will continue to tell you not only what's legal, but what is effective. Our We Get Work podcast is available to stream and subscribe on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube, as well as jacksonlewis.com. If you enjoyed these episodes, we encourage you to share any or all of them with your network and leave a review to help others find us. We would love to hear your suggestions for future topics, or if you're interested in being a guest on our show, please reach out to us at wegetwork@jacksonlewis.com. Thank you for tuning in.